Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Drizzle Land, and this is Chiller. Chiller is the brand new paranormal show that I'm gonna be doing. Um, it's gonna be a little bit about my background and growing up in a haunted house. Let's actually say a haunted town, frankly, because it's a creepy town. Um, and I also want to discuss about some of the other cases that people have reported, honestly, around the world. Um, we're gonna talk a little bit about like the Amityville case, um, some of the other major things that have happened, honestly, in the paranormal field. Um, let's talk a little bit about my background, though. Um, so I grew up in a town in Michigan. Um, the town was originally founded back in I think it was 1835. Yeah. The cemetery was built shortly after that. Um, and what I know is that that whole area and that whole piece of land was formerly Native American land. Um, Basically, the settlers were coming um, to that area um, to head out west, but there was a lot of deaths and things like that that happened with disease and some rare occasions of people um, basically starving to death. Um, and not to mention that five of the people that lived in my neighborhood had mysterious deaths um, that were basically linked to, well, let's just say accidents, things that frankly don't make any sense. Um, so, and I've never really talked about this to anybody. So let's get into it. When I was 4 years old, we moved actually to this town because originally I was born in a different town. And then my mom bought this 2-story house that was apparently it used to be two different apartments that were my mom and her family basically redid it into a big house. Uh, what I noticed about that house was we had a wood burning stove in the basement, um, but it never really mattered how much wood that you burnt in the basement. It always was frigid cold. Um, Now, I noticed that there was a weird smell because we had like some cellars and crawl spaces and things like that. We also had two attics, which I never felt comfortable going into. I always felt like something was watching me there. Um, Now, the day when my mom moved our stuff into the house, um, after all the construction and stuff was done and it was ready to be moved in, I was around 4 years old. My sister was around, well, let's say one, and my older sister was not living with my mom at that point in time. She was living with her real dad, and she was much older. I want to say probably like 11 years old, something like that, 12. Um, that night after we moved our stuff in, we basically slept in the living room upstairs. We didn't have our rooms together yet. Um, but the first thing I noticed about that night was nothing really felt right. Um, every room kind of had its own vibe to it. Um, and no, something else that was creepy was that we kept hearing like walking and stuff like up in the attic. Um, and it wasn't like an animal because you can tell if it's an animal or not because obviously it would sound like an animal. This did not sound like an animal. This sounded like cowboy boots like pounding on a wall. um, and we heard talking. My sister was woken up several times in the living room by, something. Um, we didn't have pets or anything then. Um, so that was kind of the first incident where I was like, okay, this doesn't seem right to me. Um, and it's pretty bad that I was 4 years old and I was noticing that. Um, and then my sister, when she got to about 2 years old, she had this imaginary friend. Um, and it being that I'm her brother, I kind of asked her when I was older, like, what is this imaginary friend? She was saying that it was a man. And I'm like, okay, like, what kind of man? And she's like, um, he has cowboy boots on and a hat, and he looks like a cowboy. And I'm like, okay, that doesn't sound good. So I bring this to my mom, and I'm like, did you know that your daughter is seeing a spirit? And my mom is like, oh, well, that's just her imaginary friend. It's something she made up in her head. And it's like, no, mom. No, no, no. Um, I noticed when we first came here that whatever this thing was, it is talking to your daughter, um, and it's not cool. It's not good. um, and then as time went on, um, weird stuff started happening. Lights going on and off, faucets turning on by themselves, voices being heard, things actually lifting up off tables and smashing into walls. Um, when I was 8 years old, I had a bunch of my friends over. It was around my birthday. We were all playing, I believe it was like Super Mario Brothers 3 and a few other games. And all of a sudden, my friend taps me on the shoulder and he's like, why is there a shadow in the corner that is taller than all of us? Almost like it's looking at us. And I'm like, okay. So I glance in the corner and I see the shadow. And it is. This shadow is like 6 foot tall. And I'm thinking to myself, we're kids. There's no way that we are 6 foot tall. And we started smelling this musty smell like rotten eggs. Um, that was my real first paranormal experience when I was 8 years old. Um, Almost to be like, okay, whatever this is, it's definitely not good because I've heard now that that means that it's like demonic or something like that. That it's taking shape to try to convince some younger kids to pay attention to it. Um, and then when I was older, I started reading some of the history of the land and things like that. And yes, there were a lot of settlers who came through that area in that county who did pass away from disease and illness and things like that, and also people who were murdered, um, by basically other people for money and things like that, land. Um, Now, the fact that the dare was when I was in elementary was to go to the cemetery and stay there from 1 to 4 in the morning and take a tape recorder and basically tape and see if you can figure out, what's going on in the cemetery. Because when I was in elementary school, all my friends pretty much said we have one of the most haunted cemeteries here in town. The whole town is haunted. Um, and as a kid, you kind of like you're like, well, I don't know if I totally believe that. But when I was 11 years old, they finally convinced me and two of my friends to go into the cemetery, stay there for 3 hours, and see if we catch anything. Well, that opened up a huge chest because bingo, I was scared absolutely out of my mind. Um, During that nighttime, my friends and I we snuck in. Um, we basically hung out in the older part of the cemetery, some of the graves from the 1800s. Who were, a lot of the graves were actually seeping into the swamp because there was a swamp behind the cemetery. Um, you couldn't even read the headstones. Some of the landmarks were so faded, and some of the statues look really creepy. Um, and there was a mausoleum. It was just a creepy ass place to go to. Um, During that nighttime, one of my friends was so terrified because of what he saw that he never went back to that cemetery for the rest of his life because he was that terrified. Um, During that night, we caught orbs, we caught voices, we also saw floating heads and bodies, dismembered bodies, like where people were holding their heads. Um, we also saw the Swamp Lady, the legend of the Swamp Lady, which is this creepy woman that apparently was killed by her father because basically her father didn't approve of who she was marrying, so he just wanted to get the insurance money. So he basically just had her murdered, um, and that guy was actually put on trial, actually, and hung. So, and I actually encountered that spirit, um, because when I got home from all of this stuff, several weeks later, this ghost actually contacted me several times and scared the living crap out of me. Um, Now, I woke up several times during the night. Well, pretty much exactly at 1 o'clock in the morning, like 3 nights in a row. This is when I was probably 13 years old. Um, Something just didn't seem right. Um, for example, I kept smelling perfume, which didn't make sense because, I mean, how would I smell perfume all the way in the basement? Because that's where my room was. Um, then I started noticing that there were like scratch marks on the wall near like my bed. Um, then I also started noticing that there was something writing something on my mirror. Like I would wake up in the middle of the night and there would be like something written on my mirror, and I'm like, that's creepy. Um, the creepiest thing that ever happened to me though was the swamp lady physically attacked me by ripping off sheets when I was laying in bed and clawing my leg. I actually had scratch marks on my leg. And she also talked to me. She actually came to me in a mist and was talking to me and said, basically, I'm coming for you. I'm here, and I'm not going to leave until I get you. Now, every 13-year-old, trust me, if you experience this, you would be scared shitless. You would never want to go in that room ever again. But I had no choice because my parents said it was all in my head. Of course, they didn't know about me sneaking into the cemetery, but now my mom actually finally believed me when something happened to her. Um, she was in the kitchen making dinner, and all of a sudden, the pantry door just opened, she said. And she started hearing what sounded like footsteps. And she said that it actually called her name. And it was wanting her to go in there with her. And I said, Mom, that's the same thing that happened to me. Whatever this thing is, it does not want us here. I had to put up with this for about 10 years or 11 years of my life before the house was cleansed. And even then, something didn't quite feel right. Like there was still other ghosts there because what was strange was we had a neighbor that lived right next door who said that he was hearing voices and things were actually waking him up in the middle of the night. So apparently it wasn't just us. It was the whole neighborhood. Everybody was having incidents with whatever this spirit was or whatever. Um, and we talked to the priest who came and actually cleansed the house, and he said, yes, I've been to other houses in this neighborhood. Pretty much the whole neighborhood has had some form of cleansing. And I was like, okay. Um, so the whole neighborhood is haunted? That's what I kept thinking as I was growing up. Um, Now, even more creepier than that was three of my neighbors committed suicide within a few years after that. And I had talked to some of their relatives, and they had said, did you know that they were hearing voices and things were talking to them and telling them to kill themselves? And I'm like, hmm, isn't that convenient? So basically, I never quite felt comfortable living in the house that I grew up in because it never failed. We always had some type of spiritual activity in there. Um, I mean, there was one time, this was a few years ago before the house was sold. Um, my mom wanted the Christmas decorations down. They were up in the upper attic. Um, I even begged and pleaded with her. I even said, I don't want to go up there. It creeps me out so bad. I don't feel comfortable doing this by myself. Um, and she just insisted on getting the Christmas decorations down. Um, so I take a flashlight, I go up there, start scoping out a little bit to see if I see anything, because after experiencing stuff when you're growing up, you're like, what next is gonna happen to me that's gonna creep me out and make me basically piss my pants? Well, during that time when I went in the attic, something actually grabbed me on my shoulders, held on, and was saying my name. And it also said, get out. I had scratch marks on my shoulders. I even went to a doctor. They looked at the scratch marks and they said, we don't know. How did this happen? And of course, I'm not going to sit there and say, oh, well, a ghost attacked me. or poltergeist attacked me, a demon, something. Because they're not going to believe that. They're just going to, like, think that I'm nuts. So I basically said, oh, I fell. And so that was where that led, and that was pretty much it. But basically, from that point on, I never went up to that attic ever again. Even after my parents sold the house. No, never did. Nope. No way in hell. I mean, now, I've had so many incidents of paranormal things happening to me in my life, um, to where it's not really a question of a matter of whether I believe or not. It's more of I do believe, because I physically had things happen to me. I mean, I had scratch marks. I was actually touched. I had things calling my name. So I guess what I want to accomplish with this video is don't be afraid to tell your story. Um, I mean, I've even to this day in the last few years, I've had things happen to me that I cannot explain. And honestly, the other thing is too is I feel like what was ever after me when I was a kid honestly has been following me since then, because I still have creepy things happen to me. My first apartment, for example, um, I found out that people were basically murdered in that apartment uh, years before I lived there. Um, and my roommate at the time was one of my friends, and he was so creeped out by the place that he basically moved out. He couldn't handle it anymore, and I was stuck with the lease until I could get out of it. Um, the story was that we were told was that the original person and his family that built the basically the apartment, um, it was a normal family environment until his wife started cheating on him, and he basically went nuts and killed his whole family. He shot them all. Um, Now, if I would have known that, I would have never moved into that apartment. Um, but something never really felt right about it. The day that I moved in there, I mean, faucets would turn on their own, lights would flash on and off, there would be weird smells. We would randomly have like handprints on walls that wouldn't go away. I had things typing on my computer that I would wake up in the morning and there would be messages on my computer saying, I can see you. Um, I'm I know who you are. Things like bloody, murder, weird things being typed on my screen that I didn't even type on my computer. Um, I came home from work one day and there was a message on my computer that said, I'm here to kill you. That was the last straw for me. That was when I was like, okay, this place has some creepy stuff going on. I am out of here. So I basically bought myself out of that lease. Um, and now I've had other incidents too, that can't be explained too. I mean, things where I've had dead relatives come back and physically talk to me. Um, I do think that I have people watching out for me, because I have had a few incidents in my lifetime where I almost died. Um, and so I guess what I want to accomplish with this video is, have you guys ever experienced anything? Have you guys had anything happen to you? Would you like to tell me a little bit more about your experiences? And then also with this show, I want to accomplish talking about some of the other ghost, uh, cases all around the world that are very interesting, such as like Amityville, um, and like the Lizzie Borden case, for example. Um, things like that.